So this is Vince Berk again. I'm the Chief Architect for Security. This time we're going to talk about the need for AI ML, and I'm going to tip the veil a bit on some technologies that we have in our products. So one thing that I want to make is a general observation, right? This goes for the entire field, not just for Riverbed, is that in the old days, and I'm talking about probably the last 20 years, what made you good at network analysis was truly what you're able to collect, right? You had an expert like John or Gwen that we'll see in a little bit, and you were able to collect telemetry from very, very many places, all different types of telemetry, right? Packets, flows, logs, and what have you. And then a skilled operator could draw conclusions on that data by analyzing it, pivoting back and forth many, many times, like John was doing, right? Those pivots are essentially laying relationships for very targeted searches. We'll call them correlations for now. And if you're able to collect it at scale, you had a good enterprise solution. Now, the cloud didn't just unlock our ability to train neural networks, right? It also unlocked the ability for brute force collection of large amounts of data, which means that what you collect is no longer the differentiator between a good network troubleshooting product and a poor one. Instead, what I think the next decade will be about is what you do with that data. Now, I'm going to talk about those examples, right? So it's no longer about what you collect, it's what you do with it. Now, what is driving it? And I want to nuance this because I want to keep going back to the operator, the person that understands the intent of the network. So what is driving this is obviously analytics that work, which is really what I've sort of been on and which we'll talk about more. But with that comes a very important aspect that we shouldn't forget, is that how do we bring this knowledge to the operator? Because it's about the operator, right? Computer networks don't go out and build computer networks by themselves. Computer networks are built by us because we have an objective to achieve, an intent, right? And therefore, we need to bring our knowledge that we discover, right? The knowledge discovery we do in this data, we need to bring it to the operator so it becomes actionable and easy to understand. And that bringing with it novel visualizations, right? Like what does a 67% correlation ratio mean on a time series that's 3 weeks long, right? We need to think about that. We're still in our infancy there as an industry. These are industry comments. Then I think the third one is, and I specifically call it out separately because I've heard before, Vince, data fusion, isn't that just part of analytics? But I think it's sort of where 1 + 1 = 3. What we see, and what I see every single day, both in security operators as well as network performance operators, when they're plucking around app response, and then they're hopping over to Net Profiler. And I've done a demo, Fortech Field Day or Network Field Day, where I was hopping back and forth between two of our products to show you how I caught a malicious command and control channel and a data access, and it's very powerful, but it's also manual, right? And it was an active data fusion that I'm doing, right? And that's what our analytics need to focus on. And finally, scale of both compute and storage. You already know that, and Riverbed's been there. So we've done a good job at this data acquisition as Riverbed. Where you'll see us really put the focus in the next decade, and this has been ongoing, is in doing more with that data. Now, I'm going to start giving you one example, and in the next section, I'll give you another example, and that's how we'll round it out. So, okay, so this is in the product, shipping roughly this quarter. What you're seeing on the left-hand side is a top end list, right? Any kind of topping list that you might imagine of hosts based on the number of megabytes that they're putting on the network. You see these little spark line charts that show you how busy they are. Everybody's familiar with them. We're not the only ones in the industry doing that. Except that if I give you this graph, what has changed? And this is where your tribal knowledge comes in, right? Like only if you've known this network for a long time can you really see what matters here. So I'm going to expand it to our new view. This view has got a couple of arrows, a couple of stars, a couple of lines on it, and they all mean something. It's also got some text at the bottom and text on the side. what we're doing here is we'll call this rank analysis. What we're doing here is we're encoding that tribal knowledge for you. We're showing which systems or which IP addresses, or this applies to interfaces, hosts, what have you, right, have gone up on the list. We show you which ones have gone down in the list, right? And we're trying to explain to you which ones have come out of nowhere, right? For instance, if you look at number 3 here, this host is almost never present in this list at this time of day, this time of week, what have you, depending on the time series you're looking at. Now we're pointing that out there in the yellow. Now, I want to point out something else, which is actually even more important. And to me, one thing that humans are really poor at is spotting data that goes missing. And what I mean by that is when I walk into the living room and, a plant was moved or even a piece of furniture has disappeared, I probably won't notice it. Now, when you add something, humans typically spot that, but taking things away, unless you're really using it day to day, you probably are not spotting that. And that may actually be just as important of a piece of information. So we're giving you other findings as well. It's extremely unusual for that IP address over there to be absent this time of week, right? It could be actionable information. Here's another way. This is actually a screenshot of an earlier prototype of this. And I put it in specifically for you to think about how important that visualization is, because these analytics, well, they're nothing particularly hard, right? I mean, there's a bit of knowledge encoding in there. There's a bit of time series information in there. There's a bit of state that needs to be kept, nothing that's out of the ordinary for a standard data scientist, but how to bring this to the operator in a way that the operator has value to it. And this was one of the earlier user interfaces that we had for that, right? And this is, we had lines and we had, things that could be a bit more confusing. The other example is more wordy, right? But there's other ways to show this information, and only time will tell what is going to be interesting. Here's a better example of it. This is an example of actually overlaying the data as people are looking at it, because there's actually so much information on where things typically are, either based on magnitude, either based on how far does something move, right? Like, it's there, but everything else is now lower, and therefore it's not unusual that this guy is here, but it's more unusual that the others are missing, right? So you can give voiceover, like bubbles, when people hover over it. So we're trying to augment the data that you already get today with context that you otherwise needed to be remembering, which can be extremely helpful, especially if you've never looked at a network segment or a host or the CPU time and memory load of a router and NetIM, as the case may be. So that was
I have a quick question there. So for like the rank analysis, and this probably applies to most of the things I think you're going to cover here, is there a mechanism for human feedback? So obviously if you change, utilization patterns change. And so, I think, from my opinion, I think it'd be valuable to say, hey, I expected that to happen. We're doing a big transfer that week, in this time frame, and that probably affects other decisions that I can imagine the algorithm's going to make. So is that functionality that's kind of targeted for this?
You're absolutely right. We're talking about this as the TiVo system, like, the thumbs up, thumbs down. I know about it. This is really important to me. Without committing to any specific roadmap items on that, I believe that in general, like, this is a statement of just concept, right? In general, the human is a very key part of telling the system that it's doing a good job or not. I have a better example coming of that later on. But in things like this, I feel that one does need to be able to say, this was really good information. Tell me more about that when you see these kinds of things happen. And this is, I don't bother me with this again, and basically score things up or down. So I completely agree with you. And that is certainly top of mind for the folks at Riverbed.